Why do so many writers say that outlining prevents them from being creative?
Oh, I think that I think a lot of writers feel like if they outline in too detailed of a manner, it will sort of force them into a corner when they're writing, right? They'll have it too planned out. It'll take the creativity out of it. It'll take that sort of spontaneity out of their creative process or something like that. I guess that's my that's my best guess. That's why some writers think that that outlining is stifling. But I actually think that outlining the process of outlining your story, like breaking your story and forming the outline, can be the creative process, right? Like that sort of creative process that you look for when you're writing, of discovery and coming up with new ideas by kind of juxtaposing things that you didn't expect or whatever. You can do that in the outlining process itself, right? And kind of have all of those sparks of inspiration and creativity while you're working in that format instead of on the page, if that makes sense.
Do you get a lot of pushback from writers who don't want to outline?
Not a ton. I think it's probably 50-50 in terms of writers who like to outline or at least have learned that it's more helpful than painful for them, right? And so there are, plenty of writers who embrace outlining as part of their process. But then there are also writers who either, feel like it's too stifling or don't really have a good process, and so they stay away from outlining or avoid it just because they don't really have like a set of steps that they can go through that sort of reliably helps them plan out their story, right? Some writers consider themselves very intuitive writers, and they're pantsers instead of plotters. I don't think that even those writers that consider themselves sort of, intuitive writers, I don't think that I get a lot of pushback from them. Usually those writers, if they've been through a few writing projects and it's been a struggle to get all the way through because they haven't had a map to kind of guide them through it, an outline, they're usually not pushing back on needing an outline. They're coming to me because they're like, okay, I don't really love the outlining process, but I feel like I need one in order to help me get through the draft, right? So more than anything, they're coming to me and saying like, I want to learn a little bit about outlining that I can maybe incorporate into my more free-form process, but that will give me some structure to kind of help me get through the writing,
And do you think when we tell a writer that this outlining is so much part of the process, and really if you don't have one, it's like building a house without a good set of sort of blueprints, that it's like pulling back this magical curtain that they thought it was just going to be this free-flowing thing, and it's almost disappointing in some way?
I hope it's not disappointing. Yeah, I think that maybe coming up with a story in the outlining process to some writers feels like it's going to be too technical and too rigid, right? But if you actually start, because outlining can mean so many different things to so many different writers, right? So if you actually start kind of working through different steps, different tools, different types of processes to get through an outline, you'll see that it's really adaptable. It's the process of outlining is kind of whatever you make of it. It's whatever helps you prepare to write whatever it is you're writing. So I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily like disappointing to writers, but I think that it's maybe eye-opening. Like they figure out kind of what outlining really is, and what it is specific to them. It's like whatever's going to help you plan enough that you have that kind of, structure to get through writing your draft.
Is outlining a burden, or is it really part of the process?
Well, I think it's part of the process for sure. I hope that writers don't think of it as a burden, because I actually think that the outlining process is where a lot of the fun and creativity can happen. It's where you have the joy of sort of, exploring and discovering your story and figuring out a lot of the fun stuff about it. So I hope it doesn't feel like a burden. I do think that whatever sort of prep you do for your story is part of your own personal process, and you know, whether you are a very detailed outliner or more of just a like sort of broad strokes, I got to figure out kind of the general shape of my story. I consider all of that sort of the pre-writing or outlining process. So whatever it is for you is part of the process for you, you know?
Why is it hard for writers who think they have a great idea to actually start writing their ideas down and begin the writing process?
It's a good question. I'm sure there are a lot of different answers to this question, just depending on the writer. I think part of it is probably fear, right? And that fear can also be different for different writers too. Before you write anything down, I think an idea can feel complete and perfect in your head. And then when you sit down to start actually breaking it down or planning it, it can be a little surprising at how little you actually know about the idea. Before you started to try to write it down, it felt very complete and perfect. And then when you start to write it, sometimes it can, or you know, start to plan it, it can feel like, oh, I thought I had more of this figured out, or I thought this idea was a little bit more solid or complete, you know. So I think that can be scary and can discourage people from beginning the process because they feel like they want to figure out more of it in their head still before they start putting anything on paper. I actually think putting it on paper is kind of what helps you work through that and helps you figure out your story. So I would encourage people to go ahead and just start. But yeah, I think it's probably fear. You know, something can feel very solid and make sense before you have to articulate it. And then when you try to articulate it, it ends up, you know, sort of showing the holes in it, so.
Do you think it's because a lot of writers or quote unquote artists in general live in their head so much and it feels so real to them, the story, and then when you actually say, okay, let's actually see it on the, and then it's you're not asking them to be in reality, which is.
Yeah, I'm sure that there is truth to that because so many writers are, you know, living in their imaginations a lot of the time. I also think that, you know, a lot of times when we get inspired by a story idea, we get really excited about it. What we're thinking about most of the time is that sort of act one setup portion of it. It's like the interesting situation, that sort of funny what if, or what if, you know, how would this happen or why would this happen? And then when you sit down to kind of figure out the whole story, you realize, oh, the part that got me so excited, and there's nothing wrong with it at all, but the part that gets us excited is that setup. It's that situation, right? That interesting what if. And then the rest of the story is the part that you still have to figure out. So I think that, you know, it's not that you came up with an idea that you thought was better than it actually is. It's that you came up with an idea that you have only partially figured out, as is natural, right? Because you came up with that part first, and then the work of it is sort of figuring out the rest of the story, the journey that your character is going to go on. So.
Right. I think that's what I was feeling. I just didn't know how to put it into words, and I think that was,
Yeah.
that's it. That's like the setup is so vivid in our minds,
Yeah.
but then actually having it pay off and there be an arc.
Yes.
And a resolution to it. I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, because that's that spark of inspiration is we get inspired by that, like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if this happened, or wouldn't it be like dramatic or scary if, you know, this happened, and that's all that Act One setup stuff. So,
What is your argument for writers to learn an outlining process that works for them?
my argument for it. Let's see. Well, I mean, I think that having a process will help you, right? Having something to fall back on when you feel stuck or you feel frustrated or you feel like, I thought I had this story all figured out and now I'm realizing it's only the beginning. Having a process that you have sort of worked through before, you know that it works for you, or at least you know that you have some tools to draw on that can help you get unstuck. I think that's helpful for any writer, right? And you know, no matter your experience level, I think with every project, there's going to be a point where you do sort of get stuck or you feel frustrated or it's not going as well as you wanted it to or you thought it would. So just having that sort of toolkit, you know, which is what I think of as an outlining process. I think of it as just a toolkit, a bunch of tools that you know how to use and you can draw on them when you need them to kind of help you keep progressing through the process, you know?
Let's say I hire you and I have this great screenplay, and I just know this is going to transform people's lives once it's on the screen. And I keep showing you draft after draft, and your note to me is, I think we need an outline. And I'm the stubborn writer, and I say, no, it's going to ruin it. And what's a tough love way to sort of be my accountability partner and say, I really think we need to go back and flesh this out more?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I have worked with writers who were a little bit resistant to, making big changes or something like that. After a few drafts, most writers feel like, okay, I'm tired of working through the whole draft, right? So I think the best argument for outlining, if you're in that situation, is like, you can work on the story in an outline form, which is much smaller and shorter and easier to manage than working on your entire draft, right? Trying to go into your screenplay pages and make changes sometimes is very difficult, right? It's you're adjusting things kind of in the living document of it, versus if you make an outline even of an existing draft, make your changes in that document. That's like, looking at the skeleton of the screenplay, so you can move things around more easily. You're not looking at completed scenes that you've already fallen in love with or lines of dialogue that you love and you don't want to change. You're looking at it from a little bit more, I think maybe of an objective point of view. You're looking less at the sort of, on the page stuff and looking at the skeleton of your story, which I think helps people kind of have some perspective on it and be able to see what's not working and make changes without getting sort of bogged down in all the stuff all the work they've already put into it that they don't want to redo,
I love that. So fatigue, I like you use that word.
Yeah.
And so if you're seeing a fatigued writer, and let's suppose I'm resistant, no, Naomi, we've got to do it this way, it's fantastic. And then you're seeing the fatigue on this side, that does sound interesting. Then let's look at it and let's try to actually just shorten it down and then work out the problems.
Yeah, and a lot of times when I'm working with writers, I will make an outline from their draft so that I can talk about it in a way that is, has that perspective. And I can say, okay, so if we look at Act 1 and see here are all the scenes, this is the issue that we're kind of trying to address. Let's look at which scenes that might be happening in, or which scenes might be missing, so we're not getting the information we need, or whatever the specific issue is,
Oh, I love that. It's almost the analogy of, let's suppose I have this messy closet and I can't find anything in it. And then you come and you're this organizer and you're like, okay, let's put all of the blouses here, and I like that. That's beautiful.
That's a good analogy, yeah.
Yeah. Not that I have a bad closet, but yeah. But somebody that has that skill of being able to see the big picture. And
yeah, and I do think too, we get so attached to the things that we're writing, our scripts and our projects and everything, that I think that sometimes it's easier to have me outline it from their draft versus, for a couple of reasons. Like sometimes writers, because they've written a whole draft, they're like, well, I don't want to go back and outline it now. I don't want to make an outline from the thing I've already written, right? Like, what good is that going to do me? So sometimes they're resistant to do it at all. But I also think that sometimes it's easier for me to do it, again, because I'm objectively looking at the script. So I can look at the scene and say, well, here's what I'm getting from the scene. That's what I'm going to write down in the outline. Versus, if you're very close to your story, you know what you were trying to get across in that scene. And so you might outline it differently than I would as well, right? So sometimes it's helpful, I think, if I do the outline or if we compare outlines and then we can see kind of where's the discrepancy here. Oh, this is what that scene was meant to do from your point of view, and here's what I think it's actually doing,